Imagine you're standing in an elevator. You just noticed a small coffee stain on your shirt, right in the middle of your chest. Impossible to miss. The doors open, three people walk in, and for the next 40 seconds, your brain is absolutely convinced that every single one of them is staring at that stain. You angle your body, you cross your arms, you're doing quiet mental gymnastics to hide a mark that, statistically, almost nobody in that elevator has even registered. Here's the thing, nobody tells you. They're not looking at your shirt, they're not looking at you at all. They're standing there thinking about their own lunch, their own bad text they just sent, their own stain, real or imagined, on their own shirt. The spotlight you feel burning on you right now, in this exact moment, is not real. It never was. And there's a 2-decade-old psychology experiment that proves it with actual numbers. So let's get into it, because the data for this is genuinely insane. Back in 2000, a researcher named Thomas Gilovich, along with Victoria Medvec and Kenneth Savitsky, ran an experiment at Cornell that is now one of the most quoted studies in all of social psychology. Here's what they did. They took a college student and they made them put on the most embarrassing t-shirt they could find. A shirt with Barry Manilow's face plastered across the chest. Now, no offense to Barry Manilow, but to a room full of Cornell undergrads in the late 90s, this was social kryptonite. They sent that student into a room full of other students, just walked in, sat down for a minute, walked back out. And then the researchers asked the wearer a simple question. How many people in that room do you think noticed and could later identify what was on your shirt? The students guess. 46%, almost half the room. Then the researchers asked the actual people sitting in that room whether they even noticed. The real number, 23%. Think about that for a second. The kid wearing the shirt thought basically half the room was staring at him, judging him, filing away the moment for later. In reality, less than a quarter even registered it happened. That's not a small miscalculation. That's your brain almost exactly doubling an audience that barely exists. Researchers ended up calling this the spotlight effect, and it's one of the most consistent findings in the field. And here's where it gets weirder. You'd think this only happens because the shirt was humiliating, right? Like, of course you'd feel exposed wearing something embarrassing. But they reran this experiment. Different shirts, different images. And at one point, they even put people in shirts with faces the students said they actually admired. People they liked. People they respected. Same result, same doubled, imaginary audience. Which tells you something kind of unsettling. This was never about shame. Your brain isn't just cranking up the spotlight when something's embarrassing. It cranks up the exact same spotlight when something's flattering. The bulb burns at the same wattage either way. Your brain doesn't actually care if you look good or bad. It just assumes by default that you are the main character of every room you walk into, which, statistically, you almost never are. Now, this is where the story gets a little unhinged, because there was an earlier experiment that took this idea and pushed it somewhere darker. Dartmouth, 1980. Researchers Robert Kleck and Angelo Strenta brought in a group of women and told them they were studying how people react to physical differences. A professional makeup artist applied a completely convincing fake scar to each woman's face. Not subtle, a real visible scar. They showed each woman her new face in a mirror, let that sink in for a second, gave her a moment to really absorb it. And then, right before she walked out to have a real conversation with a stranger, the makeup artist came back in, said he was just going to touch up the scar a little, and instead, quietly, without saying anything, wiped it completely off. The woman had no idea. As far as her brain was concerned, she still had a visible scar on her face. She walked into that conversation completely convinced she looked different. And here's the part that should honestly unsettle you a little. Nearly every single woman came out of that conversation and reported the exact same thing. She said the stranger seemed uncomfortable around her, avoided eye contact, talked a little awkwardly, looked at her with something like pity. There was no scar. There was nothing there to react to. The stranger was just being a normal, slightly awkward human being, the way people sometimes are in small talk. But because the woman believed there was something to see, her brain went out and found evidence for it anyway. It didn't need the scar to be real. It just needed her to believe it was real. And then it built an entire story around that belief, using nothing but a stranger's ordinary blink or pause as raw material. That's not just overestimating how visible a flaw is. That's manufacturing other people's judgment out of thin air. And it turns out this glitch has a twin, something researchers later called the illusion of transparency. Same idea, different target. Instead of thinking people notice what you look like, you start thinking people can see what you're feeling. Like your insides are somehow subtitled for the room. There was a study where people played a lying game. Some participants had to say something false out loud, and everyone else had to guess who was lying. The people doing the lying were asked afterward, "How many people do you think figured out you were lying?" Their guess, on average, was that about half the room caught them. Actual number who caught them? About a quarter. Low enough that you could basically chalk it up to random guessing. Same pattern showed up in a completely different study where people had to drink something disgusting and hide their reaction on camera. Every single person swore their disgust was, quote, written all over their face, obvious, undeniable. And when researchers showed the tape to observers and asked them to guess who drank the bad stuff, the observers were basically guessing at random. The disgust that felt so loud on the inside was almost silent on the outside. Here's the thing, though. This is one of the rare biases where just knowing about it actually fixes something, Researchers ran a version of this with public speakers. One group went up to give a speech with no extra information. Another group was told beforehand, hey, by the way, your nervousness is going to feel way more obvious to you than it actually looks to the audience. That's just how brains work. Don't worry about it. The group that got told that ahead of time was less anxious. And get this, they didn't just feel better, they performed better. Audiences rated their actual speeches as stronger. One piece of information about how your own brain lies to you, and the performance improves in real time. That's not therapy talk, that's a documented, measurable result. So what is actually happening here? What's the mechanism? Turns out it's not some vague personality trait like being insecure or self-conscious. It's a very specific, almost mathematical error, and psychologists call it anchoring and adjustment. Here's what that means in plain terms. When you try to guess how much attention you're getting, your brain doesn't start from zero and build up. It starts from the one perspective it has total, complete, overwhelming access to. Yours. You know every detail of that coffee stain. You know exactly how loud your voice cracked. You're drowning in your own data. Then your brain tries to adjust downward from that number to estimate what a stranger, who has almost none of that information, would actually notice. And the adjustment is never enough. It's like your brain does the math but stops halfway through the equation every single time. It's less that you're insecure and more that you're running a rounding error that never got patched. And this isn't just a metaphor anymore either. Newer brain imaging research has actually located something like this happening in real time. There's a region called the dorsomedial prefrontal cortex that appears to track the gap between what you know about yourself and what you're inferring about someone else. And the bigger that gap, the longer your brain actually takes to make the adjustment. Which means somewhere in your skull, right now, there's a slow, laggy little correction process running every single time you try to guess what a stranger thinks of you. And that lag, that delay, that's basically the spotlight effect happening in real time inside your own head. Now here's the question that actually matters. Why would evolution build us with a glitch this obvious? Why didn't natural selection just patch this out over a few 100,000 years? Because for almost all of human history, this wasn't a glitch. It was survival software. For most of our existence, humans lived in small groups, 50 people, 150 people tops. And in a group that size, your reputation wasn't some abstract social concern. It was infrastructure. If the tribe decided you were embarrassing, unreliable, strange, dangerous to be around, they didn't just gossip about you behind your back. They could exclude you. And exclusion from the group, out in a hostile ancestral environment, was not a bad feeling. It was frequently a death sentence. No group meant no shared food, no protection, no help raising children, nobody watching your back while you slept. So the brains that survived and got passed down to us were the brains that were hyper alert to the possibility of being watched, judged, and quietly voted off. A brain that overestimated how closely the tribe was monitoring you wasn't broken. It was cautious. It was the smoke detector going off a little too early. Which is honestly a much better failure mode than the smoke detector staying silent while the house burns down. The problem is, that smoke detector is still fully installed. It's just going off in the wrong century. It doesn't know the difference between a real tribal council deciding your fate and a group chat where someone left you on read. Your ancient software sees a slightly awkward pause in conversation and starts preparing for exile from the tribe. Honestly, a little dramatic, considering the actual stakes involved, and it gets worse in one very specific, very modern way. For 200,000 years, the spotlight effect was pure hallucination. No evidence attached to it whatsoever, just a feeling. But now, for the first time in human history, that feeling comes with what looks like actual proof. 47 people viewed your story. Your brain doesn't process that as a meaningless number. It processes it as confirmation. See, I told you people were watching. Except 47 views tells you absolutely nothing about whether anyone actually processed what you posted, cared, or even remembers it 5 minutes later. Your ancient tribal alarm system just got handed a fake receipt, and it is treating that receipt like hard evidence. But here's the detail that I think should actually make you feel better, not worse. The people you're afraid are watching. You're not calmly, coldly evaluating you from some position of judgment. They're not sitting there with a clipboard. They're not being polite by ignoring your mistake. They are, in that exact moment, running the exact same broken software you are, pointed entirely at themselves. There was a part of that original Cornell study that doesn't get talked about enough. Researchers put people into group discussions and had them guess how much their comments, both the good ones and the awkward ones, stood out to everyone else in the room. And once again, people wildly overestimated how much they'd been noticed. Every single person in that room was starring in their own personal spotlight, which means the room was never actually one audience, quietly watching and judging you. It was a stack of individual private performances, each person convinced they were the one being watched, none of them actually watching each other very closely at all. So zoom out for a second, because I think this is actually one of the more freeing things you can learn about your own mind. That coffee stain, that awkward thing you said 3 years ago that still randomly resurfaces in your head at 2 in the morning, that embarrassing slip in a meeting that felt, in the moment, like it was going to define how everyone saw you forever. Almost none of it landed the way you think it did. Not because people are kind or forgiving or not paying attention out of politeness, but because they are so deeply, thoroughly consumed by their own imagined spotlight that they genuinely do not have the spare processing power to run yours too. We are all, every single one of us, walking around as the main character of a movie that nobody else is watching, standing in our own elevator convinced everyone can see the stain. Meanwhile, every other person in that elevator is doing the exact same thing, worried about the exact same imaginary audience, which happens to be nobody, because everyone's too busy being terrified of you. There's something strangely comforting in that. You were never actually under a spotlight. You were just standing in a room full of people who were all equally convinced they were.